it's not just about soothing the moment. It's about that's where we need to go next to find ourselves and become our truest self. So it's almost like the wound holds the answer. That's where we need to go to get what we don't even realize we're looking for. I mean, that work had not only healed me, but brought me to my truest self. It gave me a purpose in life. I'm fully alive. So, and I wouldn't have been able to be this person if it weren't for that wound and then the healing from that wound.
Hello everybody and welcome to Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada, where we take a deep dive into mental health's many physiological and psychological aspects. This is the show for you if you're looking for motivation, inspiration, knowledge and solutions, and that's what we are all about here at Truehope Canada. And Truehope Canada is a mind and body based supplement company dedicated first and foremost to promoting brain and body health through non-invasive nutritional means. For more information about us, you can visit truehopecanada.com. Today on the podcast, I welcome Maggie Parr. Now, Maggie's 4-decade journey to healing from self-harm has led her to write a book called A Creator's Guide to Stopping Self-Harm, a profound approach to overcoming self-injury through creativity and self-discovery. A unique blend of personal memoir, psychological insight, and creative therapy, this book is designed to provide a transformational manual for healing. Today on the show, we're going to be discussing A Creator's Guide to Stopping Self-Harm. Enjoy the show. Okay, Maggie, welcome to Truehope Cast. How are you? What is going well?
I'm doing great. I'm loving life here in Northern California.
Well, I guess you would do, yeah, Northern California, that's for sure. And yeah, we were just talking about the tragedies of a lot of people you probably know, and you used to live in LA as well, and how just before we even start, like our thoughts go out to all those individuals who are struggling at the moment, because it's a crazy, wild world that we live in.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, well, we've had a little bit a break on the show, a good month. We usually have a show out every week, so we've had a nice big break, and I should be nice and prepared, but I've been rushing around this morning, but that's all good. I've got some coffee on the go. Maggie's our first guest of the new year, which I'm very, very excited about. And we're going to be discussing A Creator's Guide to Stopping Self-Harm. And it's a big part of what we want to do on the show is to have conversations about topics that are potentially uncomfortable for a lot of people, but they are absolutely vital. They are essential to be had. And that's kind of what we're all about here on the show, is to provide some sort of support service, motivation, inspiration, knowledge to people so that they can help influence their lives and the people around them. But before we jump into this topic, would you mind just giving a little bit of a brief introduction about who you are and what it is that you do?
Absolutely. Thank you, Simon, for having me on the show, and welcome back to your podcast for the year. I am an artist and an author. I have done a lot of work designing theme parks and kids stuff and very cheerful things. And I also do my own expressionist artwork, which I have used throughout my life to heal from a traumatic childhood and the behaviors I developed to deal with that childhood, specifically self-harming behaviors. And I finally decided this last year to write the book, which I'll talk with you about today. But using creativity to heal from trauma is now my new mission.
Amazing. Well, do you have a copy of the book you can show us? I was going to pull it up, but
yes. Well, I have it in my hand.
Nice.
It's titled A Creator's Guide to Stopping Self-Harm, and that's one of my paintings on the front.
Beautiful. Well, why don't you just jump in? Tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, sure.
Why'd you write it, and who's it targeted towards?
It is obviously targeted towards people who are struggling with self-harming, cutting, burning themselves, but it's also reaching a lot of people who know others who have that issue. In fact, people who have children, grandchildren are talking to me about it. People who used to do it and now understanding more why that was. And I did it since I was 4 years old. And I'm 57 now, and I didn't stop until my mid-40s. I went off and on. I really had a hard time with stopping. It would come up whenever I was under stress, and I learned everything I could, but it wasn't until, and I did a lot of therapy. I recommend anyone who deals with this issue to go to therapy, but it wasn't until I started applying my artwork and creativity to solving this that I was able to find the breakthroughs in therapy and also in my creative process. So I decided to write the book about it and help other people with this, to teach them what I've learned, and to write the book that I wanted and could never find, which was a prescriptive self-help by someone who actually recovered, not a clinician who was telling us stories about their patients, not a harrowing memoir from someone's point of view where I'd had to read all about the details of their cutting, but someone who was really offering hope to others, which was what I wanted to do.
I think that brings so much value because we've spoken to so many amazing practitioners and doctors on the show,
Mhm,
and they've come to where they are now on their what they perceive to be their proper life's journey because they've gone through something traumatic
mm,
and very, very difficult for them. They've had to work through it and completely change perceptions on things, and now they're basically just going through like attempting to support people to not go through what they went through. And without question, whether it's a book or a podcast, or even I guess a true story in a movie, there's so much value in that human connectivity that you have of you actually telling the story and you are literally bleeding out that truth.
right.
Excuse my wording there in regards to the
Pun
self-harming.
intended.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I got a question in regards to, because I've not never experienced self-harm personally to myself.
Mhm,
I think I recall maybe if somebody in my school of 1,000 people going through that.
mhm,
But when I think of it, I think of adolescent teens, primarily
mhm,
girls. But when you
right.
just said you started at 4 years old, I've got to ask about that. Like, I've got to ask, like, you've obviously been through therapy, you've had clinical
Mhm,
sessions, and I think there's a lot of understanding and literature in regards to why adolescent teens in that incredibly difficult time of life
mhm,
go through something. We've seen it with like self-harm and cutting. We've seen it with anorexia, and we see it in actually like clusters and groups of adolescent girls doing it kind of like together. And we're
mhm.
kind of seeing it a little bit now in regards to like identity. We can get into that a little bit later, but I want to talk about like the 4-year-old in you that was experiencing self-harm, and how you've obviously gone through a lot of therapy to go back to that place to
Right.
try and, I don't know, work through that inner child work. Can you kind of take us back there and explain a little bit more?
Back to 4, you brought up a lot of things, but I wanna start with that question, why 4? What was happening? I was being abused. Not everyone who cuts and burns was sexually abused, but I was. And that's probably why I started so early. And it was a way to try to get someone to see what was going on. I scraped myself with a safety pin, and I showed my mom and wanted to get help. But she was, she was not able to. She was with an abusive man and didn't feel empowered to do whatever she needed to do to save me. And so it became my voice on the skin, a way to say, "Something's happening." Paradoxically, though, it was also soothing, so I hid it so that it could be my own thing. So, although it was a way to try to get attention, it was also a very private, secret thing that was soothing to me. It intensified when I was 12, and I started getting more serious about it, switched to razor blades. Got into therapy at 14, and that started the cycle of going back and forth, of trying to understand, trying to stop. When I went to therapy at 14, this was 1981, and people didn't know much about it. PTSD had only just been entered into the DSM thanks to veterans and the clinicians who were working with them. So, not much was out there. And I got some success midlife, but then it came back in my 40s, and then there was really nothing out there for people in their 40s. Again, this stereotype of the female teenager being the main person who cuts himself is still persists. And what I found when I relapsed again in my 40s is that this was now the beginning of the online communities, and people were talking about grandmothers ashamed of still doing it. Men were talking about it. And now, when I was researching this book and writing it last year, I have found that just in what has been self-reported, like National Mental Health statistics. 17% of teenagers have self-harmed, but 5 to 6% of adults and almost 2% of kids younger than teenagers. And I applied those statistics to current populations just in the US, which is where I live, and came up with roughly 14 million people. And I was shocked at how many that was. 35% of them self-reported are men, and most people believe it's more than that. So probably about half men. So we really don't understand the depth and breadth of this issue among the populations. And it's happening in other countries as well. So if there are 14 million in the US, I imagine there are more in other countries. So I realize there is a need to talk about this more.
When you talk about soothing, can
Mhm.
you explain that a little bit more? Like,
Yeah.
do we have an understanding of like what's the biochemical nature of why that might be a um, why that's there?
I'm not sure exactly of the biochemical nature. I just know that it's a commonality among anyone who's reported, self-reported why they self-harm. Is that it is, and it's pretty much accepted with clinicians as well, that it is soothing for some reason for me, and I don't wanna get graphic or triggering for people, but for me, the act that feeling of, cutting in the aftermath, for some reason, released chemicals, adrenaline, something that calmed me. It was
Mm,
like Ritalin. And I felt helped me feel like I was in control of the overwhelming feelings, and I had a voice and a way to vent them. Um, and then the aftercare was always really important, which I found is very common. Nurturing the wound, Band-Aids, letting it heal. So it was like a strange sort of reenactment of abuse and then nurturing and healing it.
interesting.
Yeah.
And in your experience, looking back now over the years, have you been able to maybe come to some sort of understanding or conclusion why it is that you it's a difficult one to kind of word, but I'm just thinking of
Mhm.
a there's like you could be a 20-year-old and then a 4-year-old, very, very different psychologically when it comes to like development. And I would
Yeah.
understand um the the practice of a 4-year-old doing something like that as a self-protective mechanism that's not really in the
Mhm.
conscious control of that small child. And obviously, I think when you use the word, no, when using the word like abused at 4 years old, and then leading down a road of self harm,
Mhm.
it makes me connect it to teenagers who may not be physically abused when they're going through puberty and going through school and going through high school and going through
Mhm.
the fashion and all that like difficult things like going from a 12-year-old to a 14-year-old. It's challenging for everybody, but it's
Right.
without question like you're being abused kind of like socially or psychologically or even
Right. That's a
physically
trauma.
in many cases.
Mhm.
So it just goes to show like what's the body doing, what's this response, what's this reaction happening where people are physically hurting themselves, opening themselves up. It's a very interesting phenomenon. I've never looked into the into
Mhm.
the research on it, and as you say, like maybe a lot of it is still incredibly misunderstood.
Yes.
What's kind of the current treatment plan? I mean, you when you first went to, I think you were
Mhm.
14 or 12 when you said you first went to therapy.
Mhm.
What's the treatment plan then in like in the early mid 80s to now?
Well, there was no treatment. I remember we had very little money, so I went to a sliding scale local clinic, and my psychologist at 14, well, she was a counselor, she wasn't a psychologist. She told me later that she had to consult with her superior because 'cause they'd never heard of it. This was in 1981. It's obviously not the first time it had happened, it's just that nobody knew what to do about it. The field of psychology was still dealing with the impact that childhood trauma affects us as adults. So there was no treatment other than talking and listening. As time went on, I was in psychoanalysis for um, off and on from my 20s to 40s, and I with one person who I resonated with, and it got me only so far, and it wasn't until the field of psychology deepened and changed and added new modalities as a result of a lot of the societal and scientific discoveries, so that trauma therapy became an accepted branch of humanistic psychology. So when I went back to therapy, when I started cutting it in my 40s, I found a new therapist who was trained in trauma therapy and specifically somatic experiencing. And that really helped me, grounding it in my body, because what had happened as a result of the trauma, and yes, I agree that trauma can be childhood, sexual, physical, but also bullying as teenagers, not fitting in, subtle things like not not being validated, not being recognized. It's different for everyone, but the trauma therapy, grounding it in my body, helped me get past the specifics of what the trauma might have been or the memories and into healing where it lived, which was in this nonverbal place.
Hmm.
There's a great article I read. It's in the book called A Voice on the Skin, talking about this nonverbal way of speaking through self-harming and scarring the body. And that really helped me understand why talk therapy wasn't getting through. I needed somatic body work to really get in touch with this part of me that it was literally a dissociative part that was doing the self-harming.
Yeah, from what I understand about somatic work, we've had somatic practitioners on the show. My wife's actually one as well, so I'm
Mm,
learning a whole lot about that. And
same.
what I know about trauma, kind of in the moment, and PTSD, and the response to something, be it psychological or physical, is the body or the mind, especially, will change its focus heavily.
Mm,
So you've obviously got the sympathetic nervous system, where your nervous system is engaging in a way that it's looking to fight or flee, and it's not in the present moment. Its focus is not really on the digestive system. It's not really on the future. It's like, right now, 2 minutes, what are we going to do to get out of this state? And then when we live in that moment for long periods of time with, let's just say, like long-term abuse, which comes in many forms, the body is in this constant shocked, stressed state. And we know that the body, the adrenals, physically cannot keep producing the biochemistry necessary to keep up with that constant threat coming from the outside world.
right.
And I feel like a lot of people will then be living very much outside of their body. Their focus is so much on that outside world, on their job, their school, their teacher, their bully, the latest fashion, all that. Oh, I don't know why I'm
Mhm.
so focused on fashion today. That's very strange. But
Must have been traumatizing for you somewhere.
clearly, I had a school uniform at school from 6 to 18, so that wasn't really
Oh,
a problem
no,
for
that
me.
explains it.
Yeah, it's just about how cool you wore your tie. But
Mhm.
you've got so much focus on this outside world, and it comes to a point where we're no longer able to refocus the energy back into us. So the idea of like doing yoga or meditation or being with your own thoughts and feelings and behaviors is a very challenging thing to do. And we've got, not
Right.
only do we have these external traumas coming in, but we have all these distractions as well. We've got fast food, colorful signs, we've got phones, we've got social media, we've
Mhm.
got all this like absolute nonsense,
Right.
and all of our energy, which on a daily basis is limited. It's not infinite.
Mhm.
So much of it is going on these things that are outside of us, and then we're just so unbelievably depleted that when we do want to bring some focus back on ourselves, first of all, we're not doing it because we're so distracted, and second of all, we just don't have the capacity to actually do it. So we've just got this
Right.
lack of connection to the physical body. So going back to the somatics, it
Mhm.
makes absolutely so much sense that a lot more um, recovery, healing would come when you're able to work with a practitioner that can work with you to actually bring that focus back to you, back to your body, back to those parts of your body that were being self-harmed, and actually having, I don't know, conversations with that, or being able to like feel what the movement
Exactly.
is. And
Right.
I feel like that's such a powerful thing to do. And we don't get taught that really in schools, in regards to
Not
like,
at all.
I know we see some amazing things in like Japan, for example, where meditation and yoga is part of the school day.
Hmm.
And for me, meditation or prayer is this re-energizing state where I'm able to actually continue to fill my cup. And if I feel depleted, I feel stressed,
Right.
take some breaths. And you can take 5 to 10 minutes to do this, and you can change so much within you very, very quickly. But
Mhm.
we're not taught that. We're taught to struggle and strive and keep going, and don't
Right.
show anyone your literally don't show anyone your scars, be them physical or emotional. And it's such a struggle for people because we all want support, we all want love and cuddles and community, but we don't live in a world right now that is letting people find that and be comforted and be
Mhm.
vulnerable in their recovery.
Well, that's what you mentioned, the spiritual prayer and meditation aspect, and that is a big part of it because, yes, I advocate therapy and somatic experiencing and all of that, but therapy, a good therapist will work with you for 50 minutes, and that leaves over 10,000 minutes left in a week where we have to be by ourselves with our head and our feelings, and so that soothing we're searching for, we have to learn how to give that to ourselves. And with a brain that is, I would say, damaged, but also that has not learned how to self-soothe, that can be really difficult.
Hmm.
And we need some sort of other help. For me, I'm in recovery program, so I've been encouraged to find a higher power of my own understanding. So that's always been a focus. But in doing this recovery work with the self-harming and using my creativity, I realize I can direct my creativity toward not only finding a new voice and things to express in other ways, but reaching a higher power that's creatively my own, specifically one that the part of me that would cut myself could believe in, rely on, have faith in, and ultimately talk to and get soothing from. So that was a big part of the creative process, was making a spiritual connection for the cutter.
Hmm. Yeah, the spiritual element is so huge for so many different things, be that for something like self-cutting or depression,
Mhm.
anxiety, all of these things that
Yes.
lead people down very dark roads. And I just want to kind of finish up on a point I was making in regards to having that energy, that cup, that life force that we have, being depleted because of all of these things going on around us. And here at True Hope, yeah, we've seen so many individuals who come to us, to reach out to us, usually because they've spent years, decades in some cases, working with doctors on specific psychotropic medications, and they end up just
Mhm.
not working for them. They're not getting better. They're not healing, and they come to us as kind of like their last hope and their true hope. And
Hmm.
those people,
Interesting.
once they are able to begin to replenish their physical body with nutrition,
Mhm.
in a very unique bioavailable form, that regardless of your digestive absorption integrity, you're able to upload and absorb this nutrition into your body and into your brain. It gives people that little bit of increase in that cup, that little bit of a boost where they're able to actually start
Hmm.
thinking about themselves a little bit more. They're
Right.
able to actually bring some focus internally to be able to do the other things that are hugely important for one's mental health, be that to get outside, to speak to a friend, to move their body, to
Yes.
choose a different meal option, for example. And yeah, it's just so four-rounded, because I talk about basically that point in almost every episode with all these amazing guests who talk about all these different things. But it's like this foundational piece that if we're not providing our brain and our body with like the foundational things that it needs, and not necessarily just like amazing nutrition, but like community,
Mm.
movement, these things, like we don't think about them as like foundational pieces, but
Right.
these are like macronutrients. You know, you've got fats,
Mhm.
carbs, and proteins, but you've got like community and love and spirituality, and all of these things play an absolutely huge part of what it is to be a human being. And if we're not paying just a little bit of focus on these things, then you can go from somebody who's like is sad and upset to somebody who's like clinically depressed very, very quickly. And a lot of that has got to do with the fact that their body is no longer getting the right minerals, antioxidants, vitamins it needs to actually produce the chemicals to make you feel good and to make you sleep better and to give you energy to exercise.
Right.
So there's a lot of foundational pieces that come into this, I'm sure. And I'd love to get your
Mhm.
opinions on that in regards to those foundational elements that are kind of vital for people um, to avoid self harm or come out the other end of it like you
Mhm.
have.
Well, I agree. I love that idea of macronutrients being not just the foods and nutrients, but the community and spirituality and all the things we do. And I also agree. One of the elements that I have worked with my whole life is my diet and exercise routines in order to maximize my health and my chances at having a good day because I had to give up sugar along the way. I don't drink or use drugs. I try to get 8.5 hours of sleep. I try to move at least 20 minutes a day. Those foundational things I discovered were just so crucial. I take them almost for granted now. Those are so crucial in managing my depression. I resisted antidepressants until my mid 40s and this relapse and cutting, and finally allowed my doctor to put me on half dose. And it really helped me, and I still have a very minimal dose, and it's just changed my world, but for the most part, I rely heavily on nutrients and good food, and the community is important, and that is one area that I find is not we have communities and 12-step groups for so many other issues, but not for people who cut and burn themselves. There's still a lot of
Mhm.
stigma, a lot of confusion, isolation around that, and I don't have an answer for it yet, except that, writing the book was the beginning of it. Creating the website, stoppingselfharm.com is another beginning. I have other ideas of how to proceed. Again, I'm not a therapist, so I have to be careful about that, but I imagine there has to be some way that we can find community and at least share our solutions with each other. And with every, when you're depressed, eating well is sort of at the last on the list because you
Mm.
just can't even get up out of bed.
Yeah.
But I find that with every win, like let's say I get a good night's sleep, then I can leverage that to eat a little better and it might help my depression. So they all work together. It's not just
Mhm.
one thing. And as you said, there's no one teaches us how to do this. So we're those of us who came out of it and healed can help the others who are still struggling with what we learned.
Yeah, I'd love to get maybe a perspective, but of because I think a lot of people maybe listening to this might know somebody or know somebody who knows somebody whose
Right.
child or brother or sister or partner or whatever is going through something like this. And it's obviously a very difficult touch unless you're a trained psychologist. Like, how do you bring this up? It's very challenging, and especially we'll just go straight to probably the most challenging area would be like, how would you begin to talk to a 14-year-old about what you suspect to be, self harm? And I think teenagers probably think that they hide things brilliantly, but parents are kind of always aware, always watching, and always maybe not watching, but like you always care. I'm 40 years old, and my mum, I'm the youngest of three, and I'm still her baby. So she still constantly thinks and worries about me all the time, and that obviously never
Right,
stops. So I just wondered, like, just thinking of like advice for parents who have children going through something like this,
right.
like how would you recommend maybe starting conversations or not in some cases, I guess maybe.
Oh, definitely, yes, start the conversation. I did not have those parents. In fact, I used to reach across the dinner table with an open wound on my arm and ask for the potatoes, and nobody would say a word. So it was very strange being invisible, and that was part of the problem. But so what I would have wanted at 14, that's the best experience I can give is what I would have helped me was actually a teacher did help me. A teacher did help me, and she didn't judge me. That was the main thing. She didn't shame me or judge me or put her fear of what I was doing front and center so that I would have to soothe her fear. And she just showed curiosity and love and caring. And how can I help? I just want to listen, tell me what's going on. And it is very hard to talk about because, as I said, it's actually a nonverbal thing. One thing I wanted to mention earlier is that it's a primal thing as well. Studies have shown that animals do it. Dogs self-harm, other primates self-harm if they are miserable enough in cages,
Mm,
in labs. they've been documented as self-harming. So it's a very primal experience, and it's so hard to talk about, but just a little bit of love and attention. Attention is really important. That's what I was starving for growing up. And just the act of caring. Like, I have recommended my book to parents and grandparents who know loved ones, and it's just really a suggestion about an alternative to self-harming, exploring drawing and creativity and the exercises in the book and the self-soothing exercises. It's just a way to gain their trust and show them you care. And I'm someone who's gone through it. And so obviously it is possible to recover from this.
Hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, well said. I think there's a big message there in regards to we don't know what other people are going through, be that strangers or family members or friends. And
Mhm.
um, I'm blessed to work with such a phenomenal company. We have these incredible Monday morning meetings, and we go through our mission, vision, values, and so much of it is wrapped around compassion and
Mhm.
understanding
That's
that
great.
people are in different places, people are going through different things, and something traumatic can mean something totally different to me than it is to somebody else. And it's just good to
Right.
maybe come in with a baseline of understanding and love and compassion. And I think that if you've got a spiritual aspect to your life or a spiritual practice, it's a lot easier to get into those states
Mm.
for people. And I think that it's just, yeah, it's a wonderful way to do that. And as you were talking about describing, you know, leaning over the table with open wounds and nobody batting an eyelid,
Mhm.
it's so hard to believe.
I saw that impact you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, it did. Because you get that image, and it's like whether that was my worst enemy or a stranger or a family member, it's like that has to
Mm.
do something again primal to you. That it's like to take care, and it makes me
Right.
think of the individuals who were there and saw that, how dark they must have been in their journey, and what
Yeah.
must have happened to them to
They were really
not.
struggling.
Yeah, and again, compassion, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think most people try and do their best, but there is a lot of darkness underneath the surface layer for
Mhm.
many people. And sometimes it's just a kind word or a quiet word or of silence in
Yeah.
space that
Yeah.
can do so much for people, just to let somebody know that you're there for them. And it goes such a long way.
I agree. I agree.
I'd love to finish off talking about creativity and
Awesome.
why do you feel it's essential for healing, and maybe you can give people some examples for that, because I think creativity is
Mm.
very interesting, because everyone, I think we're born with it. I think that it's a
I agree.
huge part of how we are supposed to be human beings from birth to death. I think
Mhm.
creativity has done the most amazing things in human existence, maybe not in the last couple of 100 years. I think about school. I think about my experience in school and how it actually killed creativity. And there's
Mm.
some amazing TED talks about that, in regards to how our industrial kind of school system doesn't really breed creativity, collaboration, all of these things.
Mhm.
And when you become an adult, it's
More.
about, it's about fueling the economy, and it's about working and doing all these things. You don't have
Right.
time for painting. You don't have time for doing all these creative, wonderful things. You got to work and do these things. But like
Mhm.
how wrong we are in regards to the value of those things, and how it um, fuels, develops, and breeds certain parts of our brain that connect us with these incredible things outside of us, nature, the cosmos, each other.
Mhm.
And if we're not doing that, we're becoming like subhuman. We're not even getting anywhere near to our full potential if we're not practicing this creative thing we have in our minds. So I just wanted to like get your ideas, your experience, and maybe some recommendations in regards to what people can do to start thinking about being creative, because a lot of people haven't done that since they were doing art school when they were 12 years old.
Yeah, and that's a great question. One of the resources that inspired this book, I love this book. It's called Your Brain on Art by Susan Magsamen and Ivy Ross. And it gathers all of the current research being done on the effect of arts and creativity on the brain and neuroplasticity. And they've created a new field called neuroarts, where they advocate prescribing art making in therapeutic settings, because studies have shown how much it benefits people and helps with healing PTSD and giving people a voice, from veterans to victims of crimes, all kinds of things. And for me, and you don't have to be an artist to do all this. You're right. It's our human birthright, and I make that clear in the book. It's really about connecting to the little kid who is our true, authentic voice and has no problem creating. It's the adult that judges or silences it. But
Mm.
getting back in touch with that creative voice is very healing. And I discovered along the way that when I literally cut into the gesso on my paintings and then painted red paint into that, it would not distract me, but it would give me another outlet, so I wouldn't have to do that to my skin. And then in putting those cuts into the paintings, I was creating something else, a narrative that would surprise me with what came out. And so in doing that, I started realizing there are other things I can do that make me feel that I can express in some way. An example to help possibly viewers is when I was in therapy once, we were getting in touch with the somatic experiencing. We were getting in touch with this part of me that was cutting, that I didn't have a voice other than the self-harm. And it took over me in this flood of energy, chemical reactions. And so my therapist gave me a piece of paper and a pen so that I could do something. And I just started scribbling. It was like an automatic drawing type thing.
Mm.
And what came out was something that I didn't recognize. I'm a trained artist, and this was someone else drew this thing, is what it felt like. But what it was this part of me that cut, which traced back to my little tomboy who was being abused, saying help over and over in this drawing, and then scribbling out the words because I wasn't allowed to say that. And I learned so much from that, and it gave me my first outlet, and it gave me I was able to assign that cutter a new job, which was creating this stuff inside me. And I started doing these types of expressive paintings that I'm doing behind me.
Mm-hmm.
And I recommend that in the book, a form of automatic drawing that I call rage art, because we got to get that stuff out. And when we create, as opposed to just say going to a rage room and banging old televisions and stuff, we're actually giving it a new voice, a way to speak more coherently in a visual language, which is the language of kids before it's trained out of us. So there are many more exercises in the book, but I have to say that's one of my favorites because it came to me spontaneously. And other people who have done it are always surprised about what they can create, whether they're artists or not. Something comes out, something authentic.
Mm. Well, I think that when you start engaging that creative brain in a practice like that,
Mhm.
you can gain access to things that you couldn't possibly do in any other
Right.
way.
Absolutely.
And what I would like to just share with everyone, the audience, is like what we do know about like traumatic events that happen when you're 2 years old, 5 years old, whatever. The
Mhm.
the body creates a mechanism, a pathway to help as best it can to get through that for somebody. And that
Mhm.
can last with them forever. I like to think of it as like a new security program that is very quickly uploaded.
Mhm.
And it's kind of always there unless it's got you go back to it and you reprogram. Like you literally
Great way to
have
put
to
it.
go in there and do that. I
Mhm.
think that's a good way for people to kind of understand how something that happened to you when you were four or whatever can significantly impact parts of your life. Not every single part of your life as an adult, but it can come up in stressful situations because you're engaging that, let's call it your security pathway
Right.
in your nervous system. And there are these programs there that were put in place to get you through moments.
Mm.
And unless you do the work, and we know so much now about neuroplasticity and how we can change our mind and we can fire and rewire neural pathways to create all sorts of incredible things for us,
Mm.
um, there's so much that we can do with this work. And there are so many incredible books, podcasts, practitioners out there offering these services.
Right.
And in my opinion, when it comes to therapy, somatic work and working with your physical body, you won't find anything that works. I don't want to say quicker, but like that you'll feel more engaged with. I know a lot of people who've gone to
Yeah.
therapy and it's taken years for them to really like have that kind of like aha moment.
Mhm.
And they're just I feel people are just in their heads too much and
I
not
agree.
engaging this incredible physical body, which is just littered with nerve cells that remembers. And it's yeah, it's just a fact. I'm so happy that there's all these somatic practitioners coming out right now, and it's really going to provide a lot of help for people, because people can do a lot of this work um, at home online doing courses, and then use the exercises that they learn in the moments when they start recognizing that these security programs are coming up for them, and then they're able to kind of stop it in its tracks, and that's where the reprogramming happens, and people
Yeah.
can do some phenomenal things, and they might not even be aware that the thing that happened to them when they were 4 years old, that program is coming up for them in so many different situations and holding them back from so much, whether it's relationships, jobs, doing that risky thing. Um,
Right.
yeah, it's super interesting, and we're in a what we just started talking about how we're at the start of the show, how we're in a wild world, but
Mhm.
possibility, I think the majority of fabulous things come from when things are most chaotic and
I agree.
dangerous, whatever. It's a place of opportunity, and um, we've got the internet, and we've got all these incredible things at our fingertips, and
Mm.
a lot of these things are free and very cheap these
Right.
days. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I would take that one step further, that it's not just soothing in the moment, that when those programs come up, as you said, or the trauma or the wound, it's not just about soothing the moment, it's about that's where we need to go next to find ourselves and become our truest self. So it's almost like the wound holds the answer. That's
Mm.
where we need to go to get what we don't even realize we're looking for. I mean, that work had not only healed me, but brought me to my truest self. It gave me a purpose in life. I'm fully alive. So, and I wouldn't have been able to be this person if it weren't for that wound and then the healing from that wound.
The wound has the answer.
Yes.
That's awesome. I love that so
Cool.
much. Um, Beautiful, Maggie. Thank you so much for that. Just before
You're
we
welcome.
check out, can you just tell people a little bit about how they can connect with you if they've got questions, if they want to grab your book? Is there like a little preview
Sure.
people can read?
You can always go to maggieparr.com if you want to reach me, but the A Creator's Guide to Stopping Self-Harm is on Amazon, and the corresponding website is stoppingselfharm.com. You can reach me by email through either of those sites.
Amazing. And you actually mentioned a couple of um, books that has supported you and helped you. I'll get those from you, and I'll put them
Awesome.
in the link so people can find those.
Great.
Are there any maybe podcasters out there, or other resources that you think would be valuable for people if they wanted to like learn more? Like, I just think about who's the most
Mhm.
predominant psychiatrist or doctor or therapist that's talking about this openly and providing a lot of information.
I work with my therapist and haven't explored other podcasts, but I do, the main book, The Body Keeps the Score,
Mm,
and family systems therapy is great. As I said, Your Brain on Art, I've referred to books, so I can send you those links and
amazing.
you can put them on the site.
Perfect, Maggie. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank
Such
you
an
for inviting me.
interesting topic, and you've opened up beautifully to us. And I think that's very valuable for a lot of people, probably valuable for yourself as well during your brain
Of course,
process.
of course. Mhm.
So thanks so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Well, that is it for this episode of True Hope Cast, the official podcast of True Hope Canada. I will leave links in the show notes for you to connect with Maggie and check out any of those other amazing books and resources that we've mentioned. We'll be back with you next week. Leave us a review on iTunes if you wish, and a star review on Spotify. Other than that, we'll see you next week.